video, he's sitting there barely flailing his legs, trying to get the arm off of his throat so he can breathe. There was two different fights going on. The defendant was fighting John Hernandez, and John Hernandez was fighting for his life. He was fighting to get that next breath of air. Ladies, we've all seen people get hit. We may have been hit ourselves, and none of us thought, oh man, I almost died from that. But if you've ever choked on a piece of cornbread at Thanksgiving dinner, for that 2 seconds, oh my God. It's a completely different ballgame. Not only did the defendant tell the police that he placed him in a chokehold, let's think about what he didn't tell him. He didn't tell him, man, I was in fear for my life. That guy hit me so hard I thought I was going to die. He didn't say that. When the people were yelling at him on the sidewalk, stop, please stop, he can't breathe. He didn't say, this guy almost killed me. What he said was, look at my eye. Because the only thing that mattered to him was his eye. It didn't matter enough to seek any help from EMS, though. Refused EMS help. Didn't go to the doctor afterwards. But they'd have you believe that that was serious bodily injury, that that was an aggravated assault, that he was in fear of his life and he had to do something. He had to save his own life. Really? You didn't tell anybody else that? Are you serious? He didn't just say he put him in a chokehold. He said he applied the chokehold. Now, we've watched videos up here from people, professional people, who applied the lateral vascular neck restraint. And they were in a controlled environment, and they had somebody put the arm on them, and they passed out. Oh, they came back, and they were fine. And you saw people, they were tapping out so the person would stop. You remember that? They were tapping. The person would stop. When they applied the lateral vascular neck restraint, well, he applied a chokehold. Everybody testified that John Hernandez was tapping. He didn't stop. They talked about how, well, in professional events, there's a referee there to stop it if the person doesn't tap. Remember, there's all this talk about referees. Well, we had referees that night. We heard, Daddy, don't. That's a referee. That's somebody stepping in saying, come on, man, don't do this. We're going to ignore that referee. We had the boys come out. Brian and Israel, they come out, try to get him off. Remember all that talk about, well, the referee will break it up. So Brian and Israel come out. And what did they say? They said, we couldn't move him. We couldn't get him up. Ignore those referees. They don't matter. Melissa Trammell came out and she told you, he's turning purple. Please stop. Nope, nothing. Look at my eye. The final referee, Shauna Thompson, comes in, his wife, and you hear testimony. She says, get off of him. And he doesn't. He doesn't. He doesn't get up. He doesn't get off of him until his body is lifeless. So what did he intend to do? Did he intend to just hold him there? You see on the video, his wife's holding one arm. So take your hand from around his throat. Get your arm off of his neck. Let him breathe. See, if you're just trying to hold him, you just let him breathe. But when you keep cutting off his airway, guess what? Your intentions are something else. Your intentions are obvious by your actions. You ignore all the referees. You ignore all the tapping. You ignore all the grunting, and everybody else heard it. They were further away from the defendant was. He was right on top of it. I know he heard the groaning. You know he heard the gurgling. You know he heard it. But he ignored all the signs until he got what he wanted. Until the man's body was lifeless on the sidewalk. Until the man that he saw from across the parking lot and said, "What the hell is wrong with you?" From across the parking lot. Until he got up and tried to get back into the Denny's where his family was. And this is the space that he was trying to walk into. This is the area that he had to get past the defendant to get to his wife and his daughter. And what the defendant does is he places himself in the way, yelling and cussing. What is wrong with you? He was across the parking lot. You saw the video. Right, wrong, or indifferent, Mr. Hernandez is walking back across the parking lot with his head down. He's just not paying attention. Look at the video when you go back there. And the defendant is yelling at him. What the hell is wrong with you? But then listen to his statement about what he says next. He says, he said something to me, but I don't know what it was. My bad, man, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry for disrespecting your kids. He doesn't care. He immediately launches into him again.
Your Honor, that's not an evidence. There's no statements like that in the record.
He launches into him again after ignoring what he said. He blocks his path to his family. And then says, it's his fault. Is that reasonable? Is any of this reasonable? Does any of this make sense that you would confront this man from across the parking lot, stand in the way, ignore what he's doing, put him in a chokehold, apply the chokehold, ignore everybody telling you that he is dying? And then just act like it's okay? It's not okay. The reason that we have laws in the United States, the reason that we have courtrooms, is so that when somebody breaks the law, they can come here. They can hash it out so that it's not hashed out in front of a Denny's on Crosby Highway. That's not where we decide who lives and who dies. That's not where normal society decides. But the defendant decided. And he decided for John Hernandez. There's a portion in this charge that talks about whether or not the defendant's belief in his conduct was immediately necessary to protect himself for the unlawful use of deadly force. But if that belief is not reasonable, then self-defense is not reasonable. Is it reasonable to think that being punched in the face is deadly force? I submit to you it's not. And if it's not, then the use of deadly force is not reasonable. What I submit to you today is that being punched in the face is not a reason to kill somebody on the sidewalk. What I submit to you today is that being punched in the face is not a reason to murder somebody. It's not. Ladies and gentlemen, you saw Mercedes Romero and you heard her 911 call. And she called 911 and she said she waited on the police for what sounded like forever. She was there that night. She was standing there. She was watching it happen. And she told the 911 operator, if you don't come quick, he's going to kill him. If you don't come quick, he's going to kill him. Ladies and gentlemen, Terry Thompson took the life of John Hernandez. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And what I'm asking for you is to tell him that that's not acceptable. Asking you to find out.
What do you make this evening?
Okay, a couple more seconds, Judge. I hate to say. Thank you. Good afternoon. We're almost done. I'm curious what Mr. Johnson would be saying if Mr. Hernandez were on trial today. If back then, Mr. Thompson had simply just taken his whipping like he should have, I wonder what Mr. Johnson would be saying about Mr. Hernandez at his trial. I bet he wouldn't be talking about his poor choices and how he was just simply trying to go back to the parking lot to get to his family. I bet that's not how he would be characterizing it. And I bet he wouldn't be so cavalier if he walks out of this courtroom today and some drunk guy comes up and smacks him in the face. What do you think he'd be saying about that? I thought it was interesting, just a few things about what he said. It's okay to restrain him. Mr. Thompson did what he should have done. Said it's okay. But he just, I guess he tried too hard in trying to restrain Mr. Hernandez, because the evidence was Mr. Hernandez was not giving up from the get-go. That wasn't happening. He said Mr. Thompson didn't say, oh, I was going to die. I thought I was going to... That's not what deadly force is. That's not what it is. You can look at the definitions in the charge. And you can listen to the exhibits where they asked Mr. Thompson what happened twice. And he told them. He said, this is what happened. Mr. Johnson also talked about the referee and the tapping out. And he may know all about that in a controlled environment. I don't know. Where the two guys get together and say, all right, here's the deal. Okay. But I promise you, it doesn't work like that out on the street. Because if you do this, apparently out on the street, the other guy just gets up. And you get a free pass to get up and continue whipping his butt. Mr. Johnson also talks about how he was blocking his path to get back to his family. How does he know? He just drove up to the Denny's and said, hey, dude, don't piss in the parking lot. And he's just standing there. And you saw the diagram. Mr. Hernandez walks 46 feet, comes to Mr. Thompson and goes, whack! That's what he does. Mr. Johnson would have you think, oh, he was just calmly walking across the parking lot. He was blocked. I don't know what happened. He left that part out. I've been keeping notes. This is my timeline. Every time I set a time, I put it down here. And I know it's a lot. I just put it up there so when we do talk about times, you'll see what we're talking about, just as reference. Did Terry Thompson place John Hernandez in a chokehold? Well, yes. The answer is yes. I'll answer that one for you. But that's not why we're here. He said that night twice. It's not in contest. The real questions that you've got to answer is why did he do it? What was his intention in doing it? And was he defending himself? Those are the questions that you're going to have to answer. State's opening. I went back and watched this, as a matter of fact. When the state told you in their opening, John Hernandez, 24-year-old father, goes to play soccer and then has a couple of drinks, then goes home to his wife, and they decide to go eat at Denny's. And by the way, this is verbatim. When they get to Denny's, he has a disagreement with a gentleman outside, and they exchange a couple of words. Is that what you heard? When Blake Wise came up here? Is that what the state showed you? What they said they were going to show you? He then goes inside, real friendly, real cordial conversation, and offers his shirt to some guys having dinner. And John Hernandez then, quote, makes a fatal decision and gets up, goes outside, walks to the back of the truck, and goes to the bathroom. That's what the state said they were going to show you. Is that what happened? Is that what the state brought you? At the same time, Terry Thompson pulls into the park with his teenage daughter and her friends, parks 4 to 5 spaces away, and you will see his demeanor. He starts yelling at John Hernandez and strategically placed himself to prevent Hernandez from getting inside to his family. And you will see that confrontation ensues. Is that what you saw? Because that's how they characterized their evidence before they showed it to you. You'll hear within seconds the defendant has the upper hand, throws him over his shoulder and onto his back and places him in a chokehold. Then holds him in that chokehold for the 4th minute, the 5th minute, the 6th minute of the confrontation that the defendant is dominating. Holds him there until he's confirmed that he's no longer breathing. That's what the state told you in their opening. What did Terry Thompson want to do that night? Well, to get pancakes for his daughter and her friends and have dinner with her family. I guess tell a man to stop exposing himself and peeing in the middle of the parking lot. Doesn't seem too unreasonable to me. Apparently the state thinks that's very unreasonable. Shouldn't call that out. What did Terry Thompson want? Probably not to have a physical altercation at all. Because as the guy's coming up to him saying, "You want to go?" He's like, "Who knew? Not to be attacked, I would guess. That's what happened. Nobody disputes that, by the way. Probably not to have to defend himself. What John Hernandez want that night? Well, we know. To drink and watch soccer. Drive drunk with his daughter in the truck when he comes home. Try to start a fight with Blake Wise. Threaten Blake Wise with a gun. Argue with his wife. Pee in the middle of the parking lot, and then attack and sucker punch Terry Thompson. All of that's uncontroverted. Nobody disputes any of these facts. The state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that strangulating hold and maintaining pressure while placing the weight on his body to cause the death in either of the two or in any of these offenses, those have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That's why we talked about so long about the mechanisms of what's going on, because the state has to prove all three of those. It's not one of these might have caused the death, and maybe one of these might have caused the death, and maybe this caused it. It's all three in combination at the same time. And that's what they've charged. That's their choice in how to charge this offense. It doesn't matter whether it's the murder charge or the criminally negligent homicide or the manslaughter. It's all the same, just like that. State's burden of proof. Prove each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. And ask you. We talked about this before. Ask yourself, did I see the ball cross the line? You can ask yourself right now. I will ask you to confer with the rest of your jurors. But that's what's got to happen in your mind. Juror's job duty, judge credibility of witnesses, wait to be given the evidence, determine the reliability of scientific and expert evidence. You get to decide that. You can put a ton of credibility in something, and you can throw something out. No one's going to argue with you. You get to decide that. I asked this during voir dire, and we got a lot of answers. And we made a list. But I'm going to tell you, each and every time that it has happened, thousands of times, the prosecutors got up here in front of the jury and told them, "We've proven it to you beyond a reasonable doubt." And they convinced that jury of that. Every single time. Ask yourself, how does that happen? It's your job to make sure that that doesn't happen. That you follow the law, the evidence, and you get to decide what's reasonable and logical. In this opening statement, again, the state asks you, hold them to their burden of proof. Please. Please do. Talked about this in voir dire. And this is why I put it up there. Once Terry Thompson initially defended himself, that's what he had right there. He had the tiger by the tail. What do you do? Well, I don't think he knew what to do. John Hernandez came from 46 feet away, directly to him, and attacked him. Now he's struck in the eye. His eye is swelling. We see that. We see the aftermath. I'd be surprised if he can see out of it. I don't know. John Hernandez is fighting him. There's no question about that from the get-go. He's resisting any restraint. We asked all the witnesses. We went through all that. Yeah, he was resisting. He was doing everything he could to get away. Everybody's yelling, adding to the chaos. So Terry chose to hang on tight. Don't let go and wait for the police to arrive. How do we know that? Well, he repeatedly said it. Stop resisting. Quit. Just stop. I'm not letting you up until the cops come. Stop. Over and over. He didn't have time to think about his options. He defended himself. He tried to neutralize the situation by hanging on. The state just said, that's okay. That's what he should have done. Try to restrain him. And that's what he was trying to do. John Hernandez's response over the next 14 to 15 minutes. Continually fighting. Resisted with all, these are all tried to hit, bite, kick. He fought until the very end. Until he absolutely couldn't fight anymore. Literally. Literally. Until he had no more fight left. He finally lost consciousness. And within seconds of that, the testimony was from the witnesses. Terry stopped, rolled off, and his wife started performing CPR. As soon as there was no more resistance and no more movement, that was it. It's over. But that didn't happen for the entire time. The state talks about the 2 fights. When did the second fight start? I don't know. I have no idea. But I can tell you in the first half, up to about right here. This is the beginning of the fight right here, 23-22-59, where Hernandez strikes Terry Thompson. And then they face right at 28, about 7 seconds later. Remember we talked about, the state says, I don't know why we're worried about that. No, here's why we're worried about it. If Mr. Thompson got control of him, and he's just plain old squeezing the life out of him, how in the heck are they rolling around and getting to the complete opposite direction? Now, Mr. Hernandez is fighting. They are fighting. That's how and why. I don't know when the second fight started. I don't know. It's not when the second fight started. It's what happened when the first fight started. When Mr. Hernandez started the fight. What happens if Terry Thompson simply let John Hernandez up? That's why I said, maybe we're in here in Mr. Hernandez's trial. Yes, the DA's office was going to charge him with something. They said that. So let's say Mr. Thompson just lets him up. What's going to happen? You think Mr. Hernandez is going to say, my bad, I shouldn't have been peeing in the parking lot. You know what? I shouldn't have come over and just sucker punched you. I'm sorry. Does he strike you as that kind of guy? The guy that just threatened Blake Wise across the parking lot with a gun? Maybe. Does he go to his truck and get his gun? Does he continue to fight, assault Terry Thompson? Does he confront and try to fight someone else? Does he end up shooting Terry Thompson or somebody else out there at the Denny's? I don't know. Everybody said he's pretty unpredictable when he drinks. Remember his girlfriend said that? I don't know. Does he get back in his truck with his 3-year-old daughter, drunk, drive away? Run into somebody, kill somebody? I don't know. Had any of it happened, you know what we'd be hearing right now? Why didn't he just try to restrain him until the police arrived? Why didn't he just try? Mr. Thompson had it. Why didn't he just try to restrain him? That's exactly what he did. Now, for you to convict him of murder, you have to be convinced that he went beyond that. And while he's trying to restrain him, he just decided, you know what? I think I'm going to just squeeze the life out of this guy and just solve everybody's problems. I think I'll just murder him. That's what I'll do. You think that's what he did? We talked about this a lot. Act clearly dangerous to human life. And I kept trying to talk to the experts about it. Is this? And Dr. Schmock, oh, absolutely. Clearly dangerous to human life. When the state had him up there at the end of the day, he said, oh, tons of deaths because of this. If anybody said there's no deaths because of this, that's wrong. That was the end of the day. The next day, when I came back and asked him some questions, can you name any MMA, UFC chokehold deaths in competition? I qualified it. No, but I'm sure there are some. You're the expert in this. You studied it. None. Then I asked, how about training deaths? No. Remember we went through the 5 studies that he had done. People had suffered injuries. They'd suffered strokes through the training. I said, name one. Just one that you know of. As they say, that the ex-Dr. Strangulation, flown in from Kentucky. He is the guy. Name one. 0. How about law enforcement training? Remember we showed them the videos of the cops training? How about that? Any deaths from that? But for about 10 grand, he'll come down here and tell you it is an act clearly dangerous to human life, period. About 3 weeks before trial starts, on short notice. Remember I asked you about the clearly dangerous acts? We talked about the going fishing and taking your boy out fishing. No, not clearly Alec, but now you're going out in the hurricane. It's important to know the circumstances of what's going on. Driving in Houston. We all answered, yeah, we need to know some more, so let's look at it. Well, the state will tell you, hitting somebody with a fist, I don't understand. It's just not deadly force. They prosecute it all the time. So I simply asked the witnesses, law enforcement, 2 of them, been on the force for a long time, the doctors. John Hernandez's fist was a deadly weapon. They all said it. Dr. Swank didn't want to, but once I finally told him, hey, this is the law in Texas, he finally said, oh, yeah, if that's a definition, then yeah, it's a deadly weapon. How about a fist to the eye? Is it serious bodily injury? No. It's my medical opinion, okay? How about the legal definition of Texas that he didn't know that we had to talk about? Yeah. Now that you've told me what the definition is, yep, it is. Let's go through the witnesses. All the circumstances, the totality of the circumstances. Deputy Vitals interviewed the witnesses, talked, determined that Hernandez was the primary aggressor. That determination never changed. You never heard anybody in here come in and tell you that he was not the primary aggressor. I asked every single person. Yep. Charges were going to be filed on Mr. Hernandez. Called the DA's office. Confirmed that. I heard Mr. Lightner. Said, yep, fist can be deadly weapon. The sergeant, lieutenant, and Lieutenant Affairs, 2 of them, all were out there at the scene. No issues with that decision. None. Took witness statements from everybody, video statements. That's what he did. James Keith. Listen to him. There's a couple of them. A couple of tape recorded statements by him. And he is the only eyewitness that saw the whole thing. He's the only one. Everybody else said, I came out there and they were scuffling around. He saw every bit of it. And that's what he said. Heard Terry tell Hernandez that his behavior was not right in front of his daughters. I bet he used some choice words, but he cleaned it up for you. A little later you can see he kind of slips a little bit. He's not one that can really keep that. Saw Hernandez push and then hit Terry. Terry took him to the ground, his words, in a defensive deal. They were just trying to contain him, hold him. He was trying to get back up and he wanted to do some serious damage. Mr. Hernandez wanted to do some serious damage. That was his perception. I bet you if Terry Thompson let that tiger up, I bet he was running off. I bet he wasn't sticking around. Trying to defend himself, 100% sure. I saw a man defending his children and himself against aggressive behavior. 2 statements. You get to go back there and listen to them without us telling you what it says. Terry Thompson cooperated with the police, provided 2 statements, both in evidence. You can listen to those too. He's by the front door. He's just standing there. Hernandez walks at 46 feet, clear as day. Whack! Trying to hold him until the police arrived. Hernandez was punching up at him, trying to bite him, trying to get up. Repeatedly stated, I'll let him go when the police get here. Israel Jaquez. He went out and tried to do something, a little guy. But he quickly, his manager, or Mr. Trammell, said, no, guys, stop. It's okay. Said he was obviously intoxicated. Hernandez was screaming. He said he could not tell if Thompson was choking Hernandez. So at least there's sometime he's not. Thompson said he's holding him until the cops get there. Described the hold as a submission hold. Do you think he was trying to hurt him? He said, no. I don't think he was trying to hurt him. He was trying to hold him down, and he was fighting back. Almost on top of him for a minute. We showed that. Remember I showed that? I asked him, doesn't it look? He got down here and laid down. Doesn't look like they're rolling around. It looks like he's getting up on top of Terry. Yeah, it does look like that. They were in different positions each of the 3 times I came out. And they said, I don't know, I can't tell. And we looked at it. Melissa Trammell. You may have thought I was too hard on Miss Trammell. But Miss Trammell finally revealed herself when she said she had a reason to be here. And we finally revealed she did know these folks. They'd been customers. And she's down here to make sure right is done. It took a lot to get that out. She did not want to get that out. But she did say Hernandez was drunk, couldn't even order a cup of coffee right. Terry stated, I'm not letting him up until the police get here. She thought he was going to hold him until the police got there. And she said, well, she just punched him out. Been done with it. Wait for the police to get there. It'd been okay to her for him to just punch him out unconscious. That'd have been okay. But not this. Terry was telling me he's trying to fight me. Had an agenda. It's what she's fighting for in her testimony. These are a lot of the facts of Mr. Hernandez, of who we got and how do you predict what he's going to do. This is the guy that Terry Thompson was confronted with. We know he's extremely intoxicated, 0.204. Well, let's talk about their sizes. A lot of the witnesses kept saying, oh, Mr. Thompson's so much bigger. That's not the case. We got the autopsy, Mr. Hernandez is a couple inches taller. And at least on the autopsy table, got him by about 40 or 50 pounds. Now, I'm sure some of that's from swelling. The edema building up. 40 or 50 pounds? At the very least, they're comparable size and taller. DA and Harris County Sheriff's Office believed he was the primary aggressor. Just threatened Blake Rise. You heard Mr. Wise come in there. Talk about somebody that doesn't have a dog in the hunt. He didn't see anything. He was just there a few minutes earlier and left and called 911. He really doesn't have a dog in the hunt. But he did say, this cat across the parking lot was slapping his arms saying, hey, you want to fight? And then says, and we see him at the front door, I'll go get my 40 cal out of the truck. What do you think that means? I know what it means. It means he's going to go get his gun. And that's a problem. I had to talk about this too. He's got a history of violence. Ms. Torrell did not want to talk about it, and I don't blame her. because every family's got problems. Nobody wants to have to talk about it in public. But it's the truth. And in here we talk about the truth. Sometimes it's ugly and sometimes it's dirty. But we got to sort through it. We've got a history of headbutting her and choking her. She signed the piece of paper saying about 2 or 3 months before this. And she said when he drinks, he gets mean. He becomes a different person. That's the person we saw. No question about that. Ms. Romero, she didn't see the whole event. She missed the initial attack. And when Terry Thompson realized John wasn't moving, he got off of him within seconds. And she said, I didn't really see him turn any color until the very end. Likewise, back to that. Ryan Steiger, he shot the video. He didn't know anything about the aggression. He just came in mid-fight and decided to take a video. He said a lot I don't recall. But the one thing, I mean, he goes in, we see 53 seconds up close. That's what we see. In that 53 seconds, it's right here. Almost 8 minutes into this fight. And we get to see 53 seconds. That's all we get to see up close. And again, Mr. Rawl, again, it was hard, but it's got to be done. And she signed that he's got a history, not just this one time. That's not what she's talking about. She's talking about in their relationship in the past. And for some reason, she offered John Hernandez, you know, he's an ass when he's drunk. That's her words, not mine. Dr. Schmall. I asked him several times, and he agreed that there's no evidence that Terry Thompson was trying to do anything other than restrain him. I asked him that several times, and that's what his expert opinion was, as the state has characterized a preeminent expert on strangulation. Goes all over the country. And that's what he said. Now, I did ask him a few things. Police surgeon, he doesn't do surgeries. He's not licensed to practice medicine in Texas. He's not familiar with Texas law. He's not qualified to perform an autopsy. However, he has done the incisions and taken the organs out. Hired him 3 weeks ago. Made him fly into Texas and testify at $300 an hour, $2,400 a day plus expenses. He believes every UFC, MMA, authorized police use of the neck restraint causes serious bodily injury, despite not being able to name a single death because of it. In training, MMA competitions, and law enforcement training. And I ask him, is it possible that somebody that's being restrained can resist the restraint so much that it could actually contribute to the cutting off of the arterial blood? And he said, yep, absolutely. That can happen. If somebody is struggling very hard against it, that can happen. And alcohol can decrease your ability to take a deep breath, respiration. We talked about that because of the level of, depending on the level of intoxication. All right. I took as many of the little screenshots as I could because it was obscure. But these are some of the words that were used during the trial. It was a struggle. It's a fight with a very drunk person who's violent and unpredictable. And I want to show there's multiple positions, multiple orientations over a 14 or 15 minute period, such that clearly Mr. Thompson did not have control over this guy for 14 or 15 minutes. He may have for periods of time, and he may have in the end, but not for a long time. These are the witnesses' descriptions of the totality of the circumstances that you're going to have to look at when you're applying self-defense, and whether what Mr. Thompson did and what his perceptions were at the time to see if they're reasonable. And the reason I was doing this is I wanted the witnesses to give us an idea of what it was like out there, what was going on. And these are a lot of the words that they used. And you'll remember I asked them, let's get into some detail. And it was hard for them. And finally, after they would finally say, it's hard for me to remember, I would ask them, it's because it's a shocking event. I said, you've said that you felt like it was taking forever. The event at the time felt like it took forever for the cops to get out there. And I said, but now when you look back at it, it seems like a blur, doesn't it? And they go, yeah, it does. They said the situation was loud, it was confusing, it was panicky, fast, scary, disturbing, emotional, a blur. Those were all the words and how it was described. And that's why. But that also goes for Mr. Thompson. He's not immune from all that. He's in the middle of the storm. And he's trying to restrain a drunk guy who's fighting him. That's what he's faced with. He's not just standing back looking at it like everybody else was. By the way, I understand the little guy can't do anything. But go pick up a brick if that's what you think is happening. Go do something about it. That's kind of the problem. We talked about it before there. Nobody will. Everybody's scared to do anything. You know why? You might get rewarded with a seat over there. Because we're scared to death to do anything these days. We might get sued. You heard them. Don't. Guys, get out of there. Don't be messing. Y'all tried. Come on. It makes our world more dangerous. But that's something different. But that's how you got to think about it when you're applying self-defense, the defense of necessity. Was it reasonable? As he saw it at the time, you have to put yourself in his shoes. You got to wear his shoes. You got to be the person that's standing there, that somebody comes over and attacks you at 11:30 at night in front of your daughters. There's lesser included offenses in there, but this is a murder case, folks. I bet the first time you've heard any of these words is right now. Ask yourself, did the state ask any of their witnesses about recklessness? Was it reckless to do this? No. Was it criminally negligent to do this? No, they didn't ask any of that. They specifically asked their expert, is this intentional? Yep. No question about it. He intended to commit serious bodily injury, and this is a dangerous act. No question. That's what Dr. Schmock said. No other witnesses testified to that. So I guess they'll get up here and ask you to consider that. Ask yourself why. This is a murder case, folks. Now, it doesn't matter which offense you're looking at when you're back there deliberating. Same burden on all of them. If you think he's committed any offense, and all the elements have been proved by the state beyond a reasonable doubt, The defenses that are in the instruction apply to all of them across the board. You can't say, I think I'll find him guilty of murder. He might have committed, it might be manslaughter and it might be criminal mischief. Criminally negligent homicide. But I think he had self-defense to the manslaughter, but not the criminally negligent. Doesn't work that way. Self-defense applies to all of them across the board. Period. Doesn't matter which one you're thinking about. It's completely equal. And that's the way it's charged, and that's the way the law is. It doesn't matter what the offense is, if he has a right to defend himself, he has a right to defend himself. And you'll get the law. We're going to go over it a little bit. What is it? We talked about this a little bit. What is self-defense? What is the defense of necessity? I know the judge read it. I bet you didn't soak it all up. The good news is she's going to actually give you a copy of what she read you, and you will have it back there to look through it as much as you possibly could ever want. And it will say exactly what she just read to you. And it will tell you exactly what self-defense and necessity is. Translation. Basically, Terry is authorized. He can use deadly force, the strangulating hold, if he's confronted with deadly force, a punch to the eye, to protect himself or others. If he thought he was being attacked, and basically if he was afraid as he saw it. Again, that's where you got to put on his shoes. And if that's reasonable, then it applies to him as he saw it. My translation, whatever you think a regular guy may do when faced with the exact same facts, what he was thinking. And this is the part you have to consider everything, the totality of the circumstances. Remember, I put up all that. What was going on out there? The fight, the storm, the confusion. You have to consider all that too. And how did all of that contribute to what he was thinking? You got to place yourselves in his position at the time and view them from his standpoint alone. The translation is, you got to look through his eyes and walk in his shoes. A man with a teenage daughter and her two friends is attacked by a highly intoxicated man in the parking lot of a Denny's at 11:30 at night and attempts to restrain that man until the police arrive. Those are the eyes you have to look through. I don't know about you, but it'd scare the who out of me. I'm a pretty big guy, and I like to think I could take care of myself. I don't know. I don't know what. I know I'd be scared.
Objection in proper argument.
Same.
I think a reasonable person would be scared. That's what I think. When you hear words like reasonable apprehension and fear, that's what we're talking about. Scared. Necessity. This one's really hard to read, so I've tried to break it down. Basically, if Terry thinks he needs to do something immediately to avoid more harm, is the first element. You'll get to read it. This is how I interpret it. And avoiding the harm to everyone else is more important than Hernandez being restrained. And then the last one, the legislature has not excluded the conduct. You really don't have to worry about that one. It really doesn't apply, in my opinion, because the legislature hasn't spoken to it. But that's basically what necessity is. And like I said, you're going to get the fancy words. They're a little bit harder to read, but that's what it says. So basically, Terry Thompson's conduct, even in the result of death, under necessity, is if he reasonably believed trying to restrain John Hernandez was immediately necessary to avoid a continued attack by John Hernandez, and the desirability and urgency of avoiding the attempted restraint of John Hernandez clearly outweighed, according to the ordinary standards of reasonableness, by the attack of John Hernandez. like I said, I tried to make it a little bit easier. Now, I looked, as you can see, I've looked at this video a lot. And we'll go through the timeline just real quick. But this left-hand side, 2315, that's Hernandez driving in the parking lot. We've seen all that. We see him confronting Mr. Wise. And then you see Kerry driving into the parking lot. And then this entire side, this is what everybody's doing. We see the screenshot of Thompson's left arm under the left arm of Hernandez about 2.5 minutes into the fight. Clearly his arm is not around his throat. The picture shows it. 2327. John Hernandez facing up, knees bent with Thompson underneath, facing left. Clearly not on top of him. 23:28:30. About 5.5 minutes into this fight is the first time we see them facing this way. The same way that you ultimately see in the 53-second video that occurs at 23:29:19 and about 45 seconds before that video starts. So about 45 seconds before you see this video, they were facing in the other direction grappling. And then you see this 53 seconds. Now I'm going to ask you, you've heard the descriptions. This is the only screen grab that I can find that gives you a clear angle and picture of Mr. Thompson in the dead middle of all this. And it's been described by the witnesses out there as red, furious, red eyes, angry, full of rage. Look at it. Does it fit those descriptions? If it does, in your opinion, I won't quarrel with you. But it doesn't to me. It looks like somebody who's scared. It looks like somebody who's fearful. It looks like somebody's looking for help and waiting for the police and hoping they get there real quick. That's what it looks like to me. The state must disprove, let me back up, if they prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Thompson has committed any offense of the three that are in there: murder, manslaughter, or felony negligent homicide. If they prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt, then they must disprove all of the necessary defenses beyond a reasonable doubt. They must disprove completely, beyond a reasonable doubt to you, that the defenses do not apply in this case. And that's the same burden of proving guilt. It's the exact same burden. That's the touchdown. It's the highest burden we have. I put this in there just to remind us. We talked about it a little bit in board hour. I know we were in a hurry, and you got to see me whiz through my screens and my information in board hour. But this was one that we talked about briefly. It's the presumption of innocence. Remember, we did the scale question. 0 is not guilty, and 10 is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Then we went back and said, well, it's 0. That's the presumption of innocence. When you walk in here, and even as of right now, Mr. Thompson is presumed innocent. And he's only no longer presumed innocent if and when you all agree unanimously that the state has met their burden beyond a reasonable doubt and proven to you that he's violated a criminal offense. And only then do you lift the bed. Mr. Cagle over there calls it the blanket. Everybody walks around with it like a cape. And it only gets ripped off once the state's proven beyond a reasonable doubt every element, and disproven every element of the defenses. I always go back to this because we talk about it. How's your shoes feeling? Wiggle your toes. We have walked a long way since we talked about, do your shoes fit this kind of case in voir dire? Now you get to ask yourself, does the state's evidence prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt? Have they disproven self-defense and necessity beyond a reasonable doubt? And if they have not, you must find Mr. Thompson not guilty. Now the state gets to go last. That's only fair. It's their case. They get to go first and last. They get to have the last word. So I don't get to have the last word. That's okay, because it's their verdict. But I'm going to ask you this. I want you to review all the evidence and test the state's logic against the list below. How do innocent people go to jail? We talked about this in voir dire. Bad lawyer. I've spotted you that one. If you think it's a bad lawyer, do not hold that against Mr. Thompson. Please. If I have done something, do not hold that against him. Sympathetic victims. Witnesses take a side. Emotion overcomes logic in the law. Witnesses lie, change their testimony, or don't see the whole event. The state asked for a plea of justice in this case. The state asked the jury to decide what happened differently than what they charged and the evidence they presented. Don't hold any typos against me. I've been doing this quickly. I've been working hard, so I've missed a few. The state just simply dismisses the reality of the fear or the threat that's facing the defendant and just simply explains it away as something else. Anger, rage, some other reason that Mr. Thompson, I guess by their argument, just decided he was going to murder John Hernandez for peeing in the parking lot. Not for him coming over and attacking him in front of his daughter. No, not for that. How do innocent people go to jail? Well, the state gets up here and tells you, I've proven my case beyond a reasonable doubt. Sometimes the state asks juries to send a message. Sometimes juries have a difficulty doing the hardest thing of all, and that's applying that burden, the reasonable doubt standard. And it's hard. Because no one likes it when somebody dies. I don't care who it is. Nobody likes that. I don't like it. I feel sorry for the family. They've lost a loved one. It's not lost on me. Absolutely. And it doesn't matter what John had done in the past. When you lose somebody, it's tragic. Absolutely. But that doesn't, it's not an eye for an eye world. We don't live in that. If that's the case, I guess the mob just come up and grab Terry Thompson and drag him off and hang him in the tree. We don't live like that. We're a country of laws. That's why I can walk out of these doors and walk amongst Mr. Hernandez's family, and they don't attack me, and I don't attack them, because we're a nation of laws. We apply the laws and we come into court, not in the court of public opinion, not what's going on Facebook. We come in here and we say, state government, let's lay out all the evidence. And we have the citizens. Remember I said, who's the king of America? Who's the king and the queen of America? Citizens. And this is one of those examples where the jury sits and decides what is the evidence, how to apply the law, judge the credibility of the witnesses, and all the evidence to make sure that the state has proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt and disproven all the defenses beyond a reasonable doubt. You have three options to find Terry Thompson not guilty. One, simply the state did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Terry Thompson committed a murder as alleged in the indictment, or he didn't commit manslaughter or criminally negligent homicide as pled, which means they have to prove all three of the manners and means is what we call it. Strangulating hold, while applying pressure, while on his back, such that that strictly causes death. Two, Terry Thompson's actions were done in self-defense. Or three, Terry Thompson's actions were done out of necessity. Three ways. At the end of the day, we are at the end of the day of this trial. A just verdict based on the evidence in this case, and I'm asking for that verdict, of not guilty. I very much appreciate your patience. I know it's long. I know you've taken time out of your lives, but I'll promise you, there is nothing more important right now than Mr. Thompson's rights to a fair trial. The state may argue that John Hernandez is the most important person in this room, and his family. Not in this room. Not here. Maybe in a lot of other places, absolutely, but not here. This is a court of law, not a court of opinion. It's a court of law. And I'm going to ask you to return a verdict of not guilty in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Courtney, do you mind?
Yes, I'll leave it completely. Yes, go ahead.
All right, say you would use 15 minutes. All right, say you may proceed.
Thank you, Judge.
And Lieutenant, you don't stop. That lady's here. Back then. If you continue, you will never get. Stop! You got to talk. It's on record.
Brian Thompson, 3075. He said, pulled up to the parking spot with my daughter and two girlfriends. I guess it would be pretty much right in front of the door where the entry right. The black one, this on the other side of the red car. Yes, sir, this on the other side. Yes, sir, the black car is. That one pulled up, the gentleman at that white truck passed away, 485 parking spots down, without any cars in between us. We're out there urinating in the parking lot, not even trying to hide it, and plain as day. So we get out, I'm like, dude, pretty much my last word, there's a fucking bathroom right there, what are you doing? And then he said, I'm not real sure what he said. I said, dude, there's a bathroom right there. What the hell are you doing? I said, I got 3 girls with me. They don't need to see this kind of stuff. What the hell's the problem? I said, man, there's a bathroom right there. And he didn't like directly turn around and show it to me. But as we're going in, it's blatantly obvious on what he's doing. Like I said, he wasn't even trying to hide it or anything. He wasn't trying to go behind the door. You know, after the truck bed, in the truck bed, nothing around him, nothing to hide, nothing to, obscure the view of him or anything. So I'm telling myself, there's a fucking bathroom right there. And at that point, do you want to go there? I'm like, go there, and next thing I know, I'm getting punched in the face. So at that point, after being punched, I took him to the ground, punched him once, in my face twice, I don't even know if
What the hell is your problem? "46 feet, 6 inches. 46 feet and 6 inches. The distance that I'm standing from you in the jury box right now. Same distance that was between John Hernandez and Terry Thomas. When Terry Thomas got out of his car in front of Denny's on May the 28th, 2017. Watch the surveillance videos. We take them back into the jury room with you. Watch what Terry Thomas does as soon as he gets out of his car. Watch his gestures. One of the witnesses, I think it was Melissa Trammell, told you that the video doesn't tell the whole story. And it doesn't. And you know that. But the witnesses told you the whole story. Fortunately, you can see enough in the surveillance camera that's mounted behind the cash register as it looks out the front door of the Denny's to see Terry Thompson and what he does as soon as he gets out of his car that night. You see what his daughter and her friends do. They get out of the car and they walk into the store. Terry Thompson doesn't do that. He takes 2 steps before he's already raising his arm in an aggressive manner and pointing in the direction of John Hernandez. From 46 feet and 6 inches away. Dude, what the hell is your problem? And he stands, yes, he stands and places himself in the pathway between John Hernandez and the front door of the Denny's. Where John is walking back to where his wife and daughter are seated, where there's coffee on the table already, and where they're anticipating having a meal together. And he plants himself in that place where he makes a confrontation inevitable. What was the choice that John Hernandez had at that point? You see him when you watch the other video where he's walking back from the car as my colleague described to you, and watch it. He's got his head down and he's walking in the direction, normal pace, toward the door. And as he gets to the edge of where that camera angle is, you see him finally look up, and he looks in the direction, and now you know what he's looking at. He's looking at an angry man who, when you see him in that surveillance video, you watch him and watch how many times he raises his arm in that direction in an aggressive way. Watch that he's even up on his toe as he's leaning there and standing in the pathway. And so what do you think it means if whatever John Hernandez says to him when they inevitably meet face to face, whether John Hernandez says, so it's on then, or whatever the words were, we don't know. We only know what Terry Thompson said. You can imagine, you look up and there's someone that is using profanity. There's someone that is pointing in your face aggressively. There's someone that is calling you out that way that you've never seen before. And you were doing what? You were standing in an almost empty parking lot at 11:20 on a Sunday night. And even as Terry Thompson tells in this statement that he gives almost 3 hours later, well, he didn't really turn around and show himself to me so much, but it was kind of obvious what he was doing. And so John Hernandez meets Terry Thompson in that place where Terry Thompson planted himself and yelled at John Hernandez and called him out and made himself big, pointing, leaning up on his toes.
That's a misstatement of the evidence. Calling him out.
The jury will recall the evidence from the witness stand.
You hear the words that he said, and you decide whatever you want to decide about what he said to him. We only have his words to tell you, and I submit to you that when you watch this video again, which you should, that is 3 hours later, notice how 3 hours after this incident, he's still not able to talk about it without doing the same gestures with his arm. He got out of the car at a level 8 out of 10 on a volcano scale because he saw a man urinating in a parking lot 46 feet and 6 inches away. And he's already up to here on the anger scale. 3 hours later, he still can't talk about it without getting angry about it. He's not telling you, when he does get a chance to talk to the police, he doesn't say, I was angry because I was defending the honor of these young women or any other persons who might have been there that night. In fact, he tells you, well, I didn't really see anything, but it was obvious what he was doing. And that was enough to get me mad. It's the kind of person that stands in front of a group like the 12 of you, the 13 of you, and says, can you believe it? I drove up at almost, it was dark, it was late, it was almost 11:30 on a Sunday night at a Denny's, an empty parking lot, but I look over there and there's a man that's urinating in the parking lot. Can you believe that? And the response is like, yeah, and because you're expecting something else for someone to get rage about, right? You're thinking, that's it? That's what happened, and that's what sent you to that level? You saw somebody urinating in a parking lot from 46 feet and 6 inches away? Okay, and what? What the hell is your problem? Maybe that's a good question to ask. But it's better to ask it of Terry Thompson. Terry Thompson, what was your problem? What was your problem that night?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. The state is directing questions directly at my client.
What's your legal objection?
Improper argument.
Right, rephrase.
What was your problem that night, Terry Thompson, that you saw that and you got so angry about it? You got so angry about it that you had to plant yourself at that place. That you had to aggressively, using profanity and your body gestures, talk to him that way. What was your problem that night? That you couldn't do the same thing that Blake Wise did. Which is, I saw an intoxicated person, we had enough space in between us, and I diffused the situation. I just got in my car and drove away. And when you listen to his 911, if you do again, you'll hear what he says. He says, I'm calling, yes, there was a man that kind of threatened me. He was drunk. He was across the parking lot from me. But I'm not really calling about myself. I'm calling more as a tip. I'm calling because I'm concerned about a child, because he was intoxicated and I saw that he was driving, and they went into the restaurant, but he might try to drive again. And he clearly was intoxicated, and that's really why I'm calling. That's what you hear him say. He had much more reason to confront John Hernandez than Terry Thompson did that night. If we believe what he said, right, and we have no reason to doubt that, you can see the video where Maria Terral is trying to push her husband back into the door, right? I mean, we saw that a lot of times. Blake Wise didn't get equally angry about that. He just saw it for what it was and said, there's somebody that's intoxicated. He's pretty far away from me. I'm just going to get in my car and I'm going to drive away. His words. I'm going to diffuse the situation. And then when he called 911, he said, there was a man that made some threats to me. He even threatened to go get a gun. Well, but I'm not really calling about me. What does that tell you? Did he really consider it a serious threat to him? Not really. Was there anything that we heard in the evidence to suggest that John Hernandez really intended to do anything other than kind of puff his chest out, say a few words? And by the way, when you watch the video, you've seen it sliced and diced into 1,000 different pieces, and there's 1,000 different more that you can cut those into. But when you watch the surveillance video from the camera that's coming out the entrance, watch carefully what John Hernandez does at the conclusion of that time when he and Maria and his daughter enter the Denny's. Because what you'll see, if you stop it and you watch it and back and forth a little bit, you'll see that the gestures that John Hernandez makes at the door out to Blake Wise, you'll see him do this with his hand. He kind of says, go on then. He waves his hand as if to say, go ahead, leave, because Blake's in his car. And then you see him give him a thumbs up. You see it not once, but he puts his hand down and he gives him a thumbs up there. Okay? And then the very next move he makes is to walk inside, put his arm around his daughter's back, and walk to the table where they sit down. He doesn't come in like Terry Thompson got out of his car. On the anger scale, he's not angry. He's not a violent person that's coming in there. He's not all hot-headed. He comes in to have coffee and a meal with his family. Comes in and laughs and jokes with the others in the store there, in the restaurant. And that's his frame of mind that we see there. You watch him when he goes back outside and goes out to the car. And yes, you see that Maria's worried. She's obviously concerned. She's concerned because did she want to be out with a husband who'd been drinking? Did she want him to drink to the point of intoxication that day? Was she happy about it? No, right? Not at all. Would any wife, girlfriend want to be in that kind of situation where you're kind of having to shepherd someone and just hope that you can keep them out of whatever situation? You hope you can keep him from driving. No, you don't want to have to be in that situation. And you can see that on her face. You can see that kind of concern for the situation, right? And then within minutes, Terry Thompson arrives. And he sees it from that far away, and he can't let it go. Already, he can't. 3 hours later, he still can't let it go. And I want you to think about that, because when you are considering what was in his mind, what was his intent, that's some of the best evidence there is. And it's completely and entirely consistent with the testimony that rang through every single witness that saw him out there that night, that had never seen him before, but saw him and talked about what he was like that night. The defense pointed out that it is not only the burden of the state in this case to prove to you that Terry Thompson intentionally or intended to commit serious bodily injury and did cause the death of John Hernandez by committing an act that was clearly dangerous to human life, as specifically set forth in the indictment. That is our burden. it is also our burden to disprove self-defense and the defense of necessity. My colleague talked a little bit about self-defense. I want to mention that again to you one more time because it's worth doing, and it's worth your hearing one more time. You'll have it to read, but there's a lot of language that precedes this, but in the end, what the law, as given by the judge to you, tells you to do is that if you find from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed all of the elements of murder, manslaughter, or criminally negligent homicide as defined in this charge, you will acquit him on the basis of self-defense unless you find that the state has proved beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not believe his conduct was immediately necessary to protect himself against John Hernandez's use or attempted use of unlawful deadly force, or that the defendant believed his conduct was immediately necessary to protect himself against unlawful deadly force, but that belief was not reasonable, or that the defendant used the force in response to verbal provocation alone. Maybe I'll address that last one first. The law says that you cannot use force against someone if you've only been provoked with words, right? And the defense has said that it's uncontroverted in this case that John Hernandez was the first aggressor and that he was the one who threw the first punch. And I would tell you this, that evidence came through the testimony in the statements that were submitted into evidence and admitted into evidence by the defendant. The defendant, of course, told police twice afterwards, and he told people throughout the incident that were outside immediately afterwards.
Objection, Your Honor. There's no evidence of that.
What's your legal objection?
That's not an evidence.
All right, the jury will recall the evidence from the witness stand, and please remember that what the lawyers say is not evidence.
Both of the recorded statements, one that's an audio recorded and this one that's audio video, the defendant, Terry Thompson, tells police that John Hernandez hit him first. Through the statements of numerous witnesses that testified, eyewitnesses, they told you, the jury, they testified in this courtroom under oath that the defendant told them that John Hernandez was the one who hit him first. Okay? That's where the evidence in this trial has come from, that John Hernandez hit Terry Thompson first. If you recall that any witnesses who testified from this witness stand said otherwise, or said that, oh yes, I also saw him hit him first in the eye, then that's your recollection. But I don't believe that any of the witnesses testified to that, other than testifying that they heard Terry Thompson say he hit him first, and other than the statements that we have from Terry Thompson that are in audio and video. But we know that Terry Thompson got hit in the eye. We know he got hit in the eye. That's uncontroverted. Do we know if there was actually physical contact between the two of them as they stood there chest to chest, face to face? Do we know if there was any chest bumping or pushing that happened? We know it happened really fast, right? And when you watch that video, no matter how many times you watch it, you will see how quickly it develops from chest to Terry Thompson grabbing him around the neck, throwing him over his hip and onto his back on the ground. You will see how fast that occurs. And you will try to watch it over and over from the angles that are there, from the video submitted into evidence, and you will see every time that it is a fast occurrence from the chest to the ground. It's seconds. It happens in seconds. But the other two options that the state has for disproving beyond a reasonable doubt the defense of self-defense, let me move to the one that I want you to consider the most strongly. The first says that the defendant did not believe his conduct was immediately necessary to protect himself against John Hernandez's use or attempted use of unlawful deadly force. The defense has talked ad nauseum about how punching someone in the face is deadly force, and that's what they want you to believe. That a strike, a blow, a punch to the face is deadly force, and so we were justified in using deadly force. I would submit to you that when that question was posed to the various officers and other persons that had some familiarity with that definition, that the response was, including an assistant district attorney that testified from the witness stand, the chief of the intake division, the response was, well, if a fist hits someone in the face, could it be serious bodily injury? Could it cause serious bodily injury? Could it be deadly force? Depends. What they said, it depends. It depends. It depends on whether it actually resulted in serious bodily injury, as it's defined, and you have it in here, and we heard it and talked about it a lot, or did it just make a black eye? If we justified someone in responding to a punch in the face with deadly force, we would be picking up bodies in parking lots of schools, bars, restaurants, shopping malls, sporting events, concerts, you name it, every day. If you say that the law justifies a response of deadly force to a punch in the face, it doesn't happen. It's laughable, right? So let's look at the second prong here, which says that the defendant believed his conduct was immediately necessary to protect himself against unlawful deadly force, but that belief was not reasonable. That belief was reasonable. He may have believed that he was justified in responding to a punch in the face with the application of deadly force, but that wasn't a reasonable belief. I submit to you that the evidence has shown you that. I submit to you that your common sense tells you that to be true. And what you've seen in this trial is that the response of Terry Thompson to a punch in the face went way, way over the top really quickly. There may have been a time within the first 30 seconds, the first minute, when some physical response, resistance, was justified by the law, when and to the degree it was immediately necessary to defend himself against that other person's unlawful use of force, okay? If you consider that unlawful force was used against him in the form of a punch to the face, what's the testimony tell you he did within the first 30 seconds to minute out of that 14 and a half or 15 minutes? You can see it in the video. He grabs him around the neck, throws him onto his back on the ground, straddles him with his knees, and what did the witnesses tell you he began to do? Those were out there close enough to see right there. Held his arms to the side? Is that what he did? That's not what they said, right? The picture that we put up during my colleague's opening remarks of John Hernandez in the hospital with the beat-up, bloodied face tells you that what the witnesses said was, yep, that's what he did. He began striking him back in the face with his fist. I think one witness said with a forearm. While the witnesses described John Hernandez on the ground covering up, trying to block the blows. All of the eyewitnesses who were there told you that they never saw John Hernandez attempt to strike a blow back at him. How could he? Terry Thompson had thrown him to the ground within seconds and was on him, pounding his face. Maybe you say, okay, that was a reasonable response to one punch to the eye. Or maybe not. Maybe you even see that as going too far. Because if you take the defense posture that a single blow to the face is an application of deadly force, what would they call multiple blows to the face by a fist? Continued application of deadly force as he keeps punching him? But there was a point where that stopped, and we know it stopped. We know it stopped because we hear it in the defendant's own words. He tells you both of those things. I hit him once. I hit him twice. Don't really remember how many times I hit him. And then I put him in a chokehold. And I applied the chokehold. So we know at some point, there's no doubt that it changed from punching to strangling, right? And defense is trying to put out there float this idea out over you that says that all he was trying to do was restrain him. And look, even the state's witnesses said that that's all he was trying to do was restrain him. Yep, that's what he was doing, restraining him with a strangulating hold on his neck and throat. He restrained him with an application of deadly force. Was his belief that use of deadly force necessary, immediately necessary to defend himself from the single punch that he took to the face? That's for you to decide, but I submit to you that that went well beyond reason very early on, within that 14 and a half or 15 minutes of time. He does not get to walk out of here based on the evidence and the facts on a claim of self-defense. And by the way, you don't get to ask a jury to consider self-defense if at the same time you're not already saying, hey, I caused his death. And I strangled him and I caused his death.
That's a misstatement of the law.
Ladies and gentlemen, the jury will receive the law in this case and let that dictate your decision. Proceed.
So you have to decide, was the act of placing this chokehold, this stranglehold on John Hernandez by Terry Thompson, was it an act that was clearly dangerous to human life? And is there really any controversy about that? Really? I mean, even the fact in the videos, in the controlled circumstance videos that you watched, the fact that you've got people standing right there next to them, that there are consents and waivers signed. Have you ever signed a consent or waiver form when didn't involve something that was clearly dangerous to your life or about to be? Did you ever bungee jump or jump out of an airplane where you had to sign something like that? In the videos that defense showed of the police training videos where they are actually performing the carotid chokes, very controlled, very short time, people right there to let it stop very quickly, not let it continue. Why? Because there's a recognition that it's an act that's clearly dangerous to human life. We have to have all of these controls in place because that's exactly what it is. Dr. Smock told you, you probably remember from your junior high school or university anatomy studies, if you had them. We all know we've got to have oxygen to our brains. And when the oxygen is cut off, brain cells die. And when brain cells die, they don't come back. We lose critical cells when oxygen is cut off to the brain. The act of applying the stranglehold, the act of placing his body on top, which, by the way, listen to his own statements, that's what he says he did. That's what you see in the video, that's what we listen to in the testimony of the witnesses. And of course, there was struggling going on as John Hernandez is struggling to create airspace to breathe, and that's why we have this occur in an intermittent fashion. That's why he didn't choke him out in a matter of seconds, because he didn't lie there still like the people who were allowing themselves to be choked out in the training videos. For him, it was a matter of life and death. There was no supervision out there. There was just an angry man who had approached him angry from the beginning that now had applied a stranglehold to him. What did you think he was going to do to try to get free? And you see, he had the one free arm that wasn't pinned under him, that's reaching and grabbing and pulling at the arm of Terry Thompson that is cutting off the air to his brain. And you see him pull at that. And you can imagine that he was able to pull it enough over that time period to create air space from time to time where he lived. Until what? Until what? It was interesting to me that Mr. Courtney, in taking snapshots from the video that we watched here that Mr. Steiger took, that he tells you that even in that video that Terry Thompson is still waiting for the police. And didn't you find that a bit odd? That because also in that same video, right by his side is the police. His wife is a police officer, and she's right there. And what does the testimony of witnesses tell you that she did? She took away the one arm that he had for the first however many minutes that he was able to use from time to time to pull at the arm that was cutting off his air. And she took that away from him. Is it any surprise that it's a much shorter time after that that we hear the witnesses say in the 911 calls, and you can watch, I think he's not breathing. I can't see his mouth. He's not moving. He's not breathing. He's not breathing anymore. He no longer had the ability to create any airspace. And he didn't do anything when the police got there. There's another defense that's in here that is the defense of necessity. It is confusing language. It is confusing language. But basically, you read it for yourselves, interpret it as you will, okay? But I will tell you how I interpret this. It says that even if you believe from the evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant placed a strangulating hold on John Hernandez and maintained pressure while placing the weight of his body on John Hernandez, but you further believe or you have reasonable doubt that at the time, he also reasonably believed that that conduct, that strangling, chest compression conduct, was immediately necessary to avoid a continuing, I guess, fist fight with John Hernandez, such that the desirability and urgency of avoiding a further fist fight with John Hernandez clearly outweighed the ordinary standards of reasonableness and the harm that was sought to be prevented by the law, in this case the law that says that thou shalt not murder, then you find him not guilty by necessity. So if you think that it was immediately, that it's reasonable to believe that it was immediately necessary for him to avoid another punch from John Hernandez, so much so that you're going to say, yeah, it was okay for you to commit murder to stop another, to keep from being hit another time, then you say that he was able to, we're saying that he's justified in committing murder out of necessity. Does that make sense? That it was a necessity for him to commit murder so that he wouldn't be punched again in the face. Or punched again and again and again in the face.
That's not the statement of the law. It's the act.
The jury will have the law.
I submit to you that when you read the law about self-defense and necessity, that you will see clearly that neither defense applies in this case, and that the state has disproved each with the evidence in this case beyond a reasonable doubt. I want to talk about intent, because there is, and before I get to it, I want to mention something. There's a critical, significant granite block of evidence that's in front of you that the defense has completely avoided talking about. And it's because what can they say? What can they say about it? And that is the overwhelming physical evidence that exists in the autopsy report and photographs and through the testimony of Dr. Gonsolin and Dr. Smock about what it was that caused his death. Okay? They're not up here arguing about really what caused his death, because that evidence is overwhelming, right? You don't get the bruises in the muscles in the neck and the throat. You don't get the petechia around the eyes and in the eye. You don't get the marks that we see where the blood has been pushed away on the side of the neck, where we know that his arm was placed there strangling him. You don't get that without strangulation. You don't get those injuries without blood being cut off to the brain. You don't get a swollen brain without blood being cut off to the brain. And we know in this case how and why. The defendant told you in his own words. How? I applied a chokehold. Okay, we know the physical evidence is overwhelming of the cause of death. And Dr. Gonsolin told you also and you can see it, yes, you can see it partially in this video. You can hear it in the testimony of the multiple witnesses. You can hear it in the defendant's own words in one or both of his statements, where he says, I basically put myself on top of him the whole time. That's in his own words. Listen to it. What did that do? It inhibited the ability of John Hernandez to expand his abdomen and his lungs to be able to compensate for the lack of oxygen that was getting to his brain, because there was an arm around his neck choking off his carotid and his jugular and preventing him from being able to breathe. And the brain was saying, we need air, and sending signals to the body to get more air, but it couldn't, because there's a man on top of him. There's a man on top of him that, if you watch in the video, who is pressing his chest against the back of the head of John Hernandez and forcing it into the V of his arm, the same V that you see in the photograph taken by one of the deputies with the very red inner arm of Terry Thompson not long afterwards, right? He called that even trauma. Even that is trauma. There's no controversy about how he died that way. Was it more of the strangulation, the anoxic encephalopathy, the fancy word for the lack of oxygen getting to the brain? Was it more that or more compression? Was it 50-50? Was it 60-40? Which way was it? It doesn't matter. We know that they both contributed together to cause the death over that 14 and a half minutes. We know that. And there was physical evidence in the photographs and autopsy of both. And the defense has almost completely avoided talking about that. And in asserting the defense of self-defense, they're saying, well, we strangled him. We strangled him, but we were justified. Because remember that one punch, that was deadly force, right? You're going to justify us for getting punched one time and then applying deadly force.
It's not an assertion of the defense, it's a charge to the court, to the jury.
All right. Same.
It's an argument from the defense. I want to talk about intent now. The condition of the mind of the defendant at the time of the event. The mind. There's a Japanese author. His name is Haruki Murakami. And he has written that there is nothing in this world, that never takes step outside of a person's heart. There's nothing in this world that never takes step out of a person's heart. You got to think about that for a second. Another way to say that is that everything that happens in this world is something that originates within us, within our hearts, minds. It's our intent. The intent that begins in the mind that we then take and we starts here and then it comes out, right? And we know that every day that we have opportunities to make choices about the words that we say, about the actions that we take, that the steps that we take, we have choices. And we teach our children about these choices. We try to teach them about that small voice that's on the inside that tells us, maybe that's not such a good choice to make. Maybe you shouldn't say that word. Maybe that word would be hurtful if you said that. Think about it and try to stop the tongue before it forms that word. Sometimes we're better at it, sometimes we're not, right? Same with actions. Sometimes we're better at it, we're better at stopping, and sometimes we're not. But that's where the intent forms. And we talk about how intent can form in an instant, right? Was Terry Thompson's intent when he got out of his car and starts aggressively pointing at and yelling at John Hernandez, was his intent to get in a physical fight with him? His intent to strangle him right then? Was he baiting him into that? Probably not. Probably not right then. But what does that tell us about his intent? Was his intent similar to what the intent of Blake Wise was? It's different. It was an intent that said, I want to confront this. This is so offensive to me from 46 feet and 6 inches away that I have to confront it. And not just confront it, but I have to yell at him and point at him and curse at him. A man who was urinating in a parking lot, in an almost empty parking lot in Denny's at 11:30 at night. Okay, so that still small voice that we have that tells us, maybe I'm going a little bit too far this time. Maybe I should back off. Clearly, if that was present with Terry Thompson that night, he ran right past that voice. Okay, and that's what anger does, right? That's what anger, hate, rage does. It kind of blocks out. It helps us. It makes it a heck of a lot easier to block out any kind of voice that would tell us that, don't go there. This is wrong. You don't want to do that. But anger, that level of anger shuts that out easily. All right? But that wasn't all he had that night. Now, my colleague talked about the various referees that were there that night, and I want to talk to you about those same persons in a different light. I want to talk about them as a surrounding cast of reasonable voices that were speaking to him throughout this entire time, that saw what you now have seen through their eyes and through their testimony and through various video and photographs. They saw it. They saw what path that would lead to. They saw the path that the defendant had taken with his actions and where that would go, right? They knew where that was leading. They told the 911 operators, if you don't send someone now, this man is going to kill him. They saw what the end of that road looked like, and it wasn't pretty. As they're being asked about what color shorts somebody is wearing. Oh, they have the same color? Oh, they're wearing the same thing. No, you don't get it. If you don't send someone right now, that man is going to kill him. The urgency in their voices tell you what they saw. And they weren't just telling the 911 operators. They were telling Terry Thompson. They listen to the words. Listen. Listen to the words of Mercedes Romero.
Let's start your turn. And okay, tell me exactly what happened. Tell me exactly what happened. I was still on the river, they're fucking outside. One was in here, went outside, and one was coming. I didn't see what going on, so we thought they were still fighting. One of them thought they were beating him. You have to hurry up, then I kill him.
You remember that, right? I didn't have to tell you. I know you remembered that. She was serious. Because it was serious, okay? But even before she made that call, there were voices that were around him from the beginning that already saw, whoa, whoa, you are taking this way too far. This is not a fight. This is not a fight. This is an assault that's being inflicted upon this man on the ground. And you need to stop. And so those voices around that took the place of that silent voice that he, in his rage and anger, had blown right past, he had another chance. He had many chances because there were multiple voices that were all speaking similar things to him. And you know what they were. Please, stop. I mean, they weren't just whispering. They told you that they were repeatedly shouting, yelling, begging, pleading. Why? These people they didn't know anybody there. They weren't family. They were the community. They were voices of the community that were speaking to him that night and giving him a chance to reverse course so that the inevitable wouldn't happen like Mercedes Romero predicted. And in his violent rage, he even blocked out those voices. He blocked out not just the silent voice, but he blocked out the yelling voices, the begging, the pleading voices. There was two. There were 2 times that he stopped. You remember those? One of them you probably remember. The other one you may not. One of the times that he stopped was when Maria Terrell, with her child in her arms, as he's strangling the father of that child, the husband of that woman, she's begging him, and she tells you that he looks up at her into her eyes, and for a moment, he stopped, right? He let go a little bit. And that, every now and then, call it the fates, call it karma, call it God, gives you that chance, even in the midst, even after you made a bad choice or bad choices, to say, whoa, okay, let me stop. But did he? Even then, he went back at it, right? Went back at it, continued. Wants you to believe that he did it because he had a tiger by the tail. I submit to you that that's a fun image to kind of picture with a nice little cute PowerPoint slide. But if he only had a tiger by the tail, we wouldn't be here. He didn't have a tiger by the tail. He didn't have a tiger. There was one tiger out there that night. And it wasn't the man getting strangled. There was a second time that he stopped and looked up. Defense pointed it out to you in their closing argument. It's when he realized that a camera was on him. When he realized that somebody was filming it, is when we see him look up. And that's the moment that the defense freezes and tells you, does he look like an angry boy there? It's just the face of an angry man. No, this is the face of somebody frightened and scared. That's the face of a man who just realizes that he's got caught on video camera for the first time and looks up at the camera. You want to see what was really going on in his head in terms of intent and anger? Back it up about 2 or 3 seconds before that and listen to the words that he's yelling at John Hernandez on the ground. I don't have to repeat them right now. You know what they are. Listen to them and see that that's what's spewing from his mouth seconds before he realizes that he's on camera and gets kind of caught with the deer in the headlights look. That's not the face of a man who's not angry. That's the face of a man who realizes he's been caught on camera. And he still continues. There's another author that I like to read sometimes that said that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Courage is not one of the virtues, it's the form of the virtues at the testing point. What are the virtues? Compassion, love, mercy. Courage is that thing that when we are being tested, when we're in that testing point, that if we truly possess that virtue, if we truly have love, compassion, generosity within us, then that courage will allow us, even when we are being tested hard, will show that that comes forth. Terry Thompson failed that test. In the heat of the moment, anger continued to control him. Anger and rage is what continued to control him. He never asked those around him for help because he didn't want any help. He could have. There were plenty of people around to say, hey, can you help me hold this guy down? If that's what he really wanted. If that was his intent, to simply restrain and hold him for the police, he had plenty of opportunities to say, hey, help me hold this man down. Never. Never. That wasn't his intent. He was driven by something else at that time, anger. Everyone described that. Don't doubt what they're telling you. They watched it that night, eyewitnesses. They saw it for what it was. It was right there in front of his face to see too. Tapping out. The gurgling, the gasping. Ladies and gentlemen, as my colleague stated, we have a justice system in the United States. And there's something called due process. And the punishment for urinating in a parking lot, or even for punching someone in the face one time, is not public execution. That's what happened in this case. It didn't have to happen that way. There are witnesses that said that. It didn't have to happen that way. It didn't have to happen that way. Terry Thompson, what was your problem?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I formally give the case over to you. The alternate will be separated, and the 12 of you will begin deliberations once you follow the bailiff. You are also in charge of deciding how long you will deliberate today. We will stay here as long, in this building, as long as you need to deliberate today. So you let us know. We will also order dinner for you in probably about an hour. We give you a choice of those sandwiches or pizza, so be thinking about it. But otherwise, go with the bailiff and begin your deliberations.
All rise for the jury.
Please be seated.